You know that feeling when you've been away from home for a few days, and all you want is the comfort of your own space? That was me. I had been gone for a short trip, and honestly, I was excited to come back, relax in my own bed, and feel that sense of peace that only your own home can give you. Home, after all, is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be private. But what I walked back into didn't feel like my home anymore. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The living room looked the same. The kitchen was in order. My girlfriend of 7 years greeted me like nothing was wrong. She told me she had spent the weekend just resting, hanging out with one of her close friends for a day, and keeping things low-key. It sounded normal. It sounded believable. And honestly, I had no reason to doubt her. After all, we had been together for years. I trusted her, but then little details started to catch my eye. And once you notice one odd thing, it's like your brain won't let you stop. It's almost as if your instincts start screaming, "Something's not right here." The first red flag was small, so small that I almost ignored it. Sitting on the counter was a glass. Not just any glass, but one with the logo of a bar from our neighborhood. A bar I knew well. A bar we had been to before. Here's the thing. We don't own bar glasses. We never take them home. And more importantly, her friend, the one she claimed she hung out with, isn't the type to go drinking, let alone steal a glass. I stared at that glass longer than I should have. On its own, maybe it meant nothing. Maybe she grabbed it without thinking. Maybe it was a souvenir. But in my gut, I knew it was off. I brushed it aside, trying not to overthink. But once that seed of suspicion was planted, I started noticing more. The house felt different, not messy, not chaotic, but just used. Like other people had been there. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was the small things that gave it away. A chair slightly pulled out from the table, a faint smell of alcohol that didn't belong to any bottle we had at home. Even the way the remote control was placed on the couch. Tiny details, but not how we usually leave things. And then, my mind flashed back to something I noticed right when I walked in. The bed. The sheets were freshly washed, neatly tucked, the bed perfectly made. Now most people would think, "Oh, that's nice. She cleaned up before I came home." But here's the thing. She never does the sheets. That's my job. For months now, I've been the one to handle the laundry. And yet, suddenly, while I was away, she decided to change the sheets? It felt off. Too perfectly timed. I tried to shake it. I told myself, stop being paranoid. You're tired from traveling. You're overthinking. But then another thought hit me, like a punch in the gut. What if those sheets were changed for a reason? And that's when the sense of unease really settled in. My girlfriend had always been trustworthy. She had never given me a reason to doubt her. But here I was, piecing together these little clues, and they weren't adding up. The bar glass, the freshly washed sheets, the subtle changes in the house. It was like walking into a puzzle where the pieces didn't quite fit. The strangest part, she was acting completely normal, smiling, chatting, asking me about my trip. No signs of guilt, no signs of stress. But maybe that was the problem. She was too normal, almost like she was trying a little too hard to make everything seem fine. I wanted to believe her story. I really did. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that while I was gone, someone else had been here. Strangers. People I didn't know, in the space I called home. And the thought of that, people walking around my living room, sitting on my couch, maybe even in my bed, sent a chill down my spine. Coming home was supposed to feel comforting. Instead, it felt like stepping into a stranger's house. And the scariest part, this was only the beginning. Sometimes the smallest things can change everything. One detail, something so ordinary it could easily be ignored, can flip your entire perspective. For me, that detail was a glass. When I walked into the kitchen, setting down my bag from the trip, I noticed it sitting on the counter. At first, I didn't think much of it. A clear beer glass with the logo of a local bar stamped across the front. Nothing unusual if you've just come back from a night out. But here's the thing. We don't own any bar glasses. We've never taken one home. Not once in 7 years of being together. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, and frowned. Weird, I thought. Maybe she grabbed it on accident. Maybe it was some kind of souvenir. But then my mind went back to the story she had told me. She said she spent the weekend resting, mostly alone, and that one day she hung out with her friend. That friend isn't the type to go drinking. Not at all. In fact, I can't even remember a time when that friend has set foot inside a bar. And she definitely isn't the type to steal a glass. That's when the uneasiness hit me. Because if the story was true, then how did this glass end up on our counter? I tried not to overthink it. I really did. I put the glass down and told myself, don't be paranoid, it's just a glass. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake it. Because I know my girlfriend. She's not careless. She doesn't bring random items home, especially not something like this. It was the first red flag. You see, when you've been with someone for years, you learn their habits. You know the small things they do, the way they move around the house, the little routines. And when something doesn't fit into that pattern, it jumps out at you. That's exactly what this glass did. But instead of confronting her right then, I brushed it off. I didn't want to seem controlling or suspicious. I didn't want to start a fight over something so small. So, I tried to let it go. But that's the thing about red flags. Once you see one, your eyes start searching for more. I walked through the house with this subtle sense of discomfort. Everything looked normal, but the glass had already planted doubt in my mind. It was like when you notice a small crack in a wall, and then suddenly, you can't stop scanning the whole room for more cracks. And slowly, I began to realize there were more signs. For a while, I tried to convince myself that maybe the bar glass wasn't hers at all. Maybe someone had brought it over. But wait, that only made the thought worse. Because if someone else had brought it over, that meant strangers had been in my house. My house. The one place I considered private. The one place that was supposed to be safe. The longer I stared at that glass, the heavier it felt. It wasn't just glass. It was a question, a mystery, a challenge to the trust I had built with my girlfriend for 7 years. And what unsettled me most was that she had said nothing about it. If she really had gone to the bar and accidentally taken the glass, why wouldn't she just tell me? It would have been a silly, harmless story. Instead, it sat there in silence, waiting for me to notice. That silence said more than words ever could. So, while I didn't say anything to her at the time, inside I knew this was the start of something. That glass was the first crack in the foundation. The first sign that maybe the story she told me wasn't the whole truth. And I was right. Because once I started paying attention, once I started looking for those cracks, I realized the glass was only the beginning. There were more clues hidden around the house. Clues that told me strangers had been here. Clues that told me I couldn't ignore my gut feeling anymore. The first red flag was a single glass from a bar, but it was enough to make me question everything. And once you start questioning, there's no going back. They say curiosity killed the cat. Well, in my case, curiosity didn't kill me, but it sure killed my peace of mind. After spotting the bar glass, I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was overthinking. But when you have that gut feeling, that itch in your mind that something isn't right, You can't just sit still. You start looking. And once you start looking, you can't stop. So, I did what any unsettled person would do. I began checking around the house. The first place I looked was the garbage. And almost immediately, I found something that stopped me. Cold. A tin of nicotine pouches. Now let me be clear. Neither of us use nicotine. We don't smoke. We don't vape. We don't touch that stuff. And her friend? Same story. She's never touched it in her life. So how on earth did a tin of nicotine pouches end up in our trash can? I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and felt this sinking heaviness in my chest. It was like holding evidence, proof that someone else had been in my house. Someone who didn't belong there. But as disturbing as that was, it didn't stop there. Next, I went to the recycling bin. That's when I saw it. Empty bottles and cans of alcoholic drinks. Drinks that neither of us buy, neither of us like, and honestly, neither of us would ever even try. The kind of alcohol that doesn't fit our habits or our taste, and it wasn't. Just one container. There were multiple. Enough to suggest a hangout, a small party, strangers sitting in my living room, laughing, drinking, tossing their cans into my bin like they lived here. The more I stared into that recycling, the more my heart sank. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was evidence. But it still wasn't over, because then, tucked in with the recyclables, I found something even stranger. KT tape. For those who don't know, KT tape is the kind of stretchy athletic tape athletes use for injuries or support. I've never used it. My girlfriend has never used it. We don't even exercise the kind of way that would require something like that. It was so random, so out of place, that it almost felt comical, like a prop from someone else's life had accidentally ended up in mine. I just stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. Who had been in my house? Why were they here? And why had she lied about it? Each discovery felt like another crack in her story. Each item was like a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture she had painted for me, and together, they told a story I wasn't ready to face. Because suddenly, I wasn't just a boyfriend coming home from a trip. I was a detective, piecing together evidence in my own home. My safe space now felt like a crime scene. The worst part, she hadn't said a word. Not about the glass. Not about the trash. Not about any of it. If she had told me up front, hey, I had some people over. I was lonely. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe I could have processed it differently. But she didn't. She tried to hide it. She washed the sheets. She cleaned the house. She put on a normal face when I walked through the door, and that's what unsettled me the most. Because evidence can be explained. A glass, some drinks, even a random roll of KT tape. There could be 1,000 innocent explanations. But lies. Lies don't just happen by accident. Lies mean there's something to hide. I remember standing in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter, my heart pounding. I felt betrayed, even though I didn't know the full truth yet. The simple act of finding things that didn't belong, trash that whispered the presence of strangers, was enough to shake me to my core. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was proof, and the more I found, the more I realized the truth was going to be a lot harder to hear than I was prepared for. Because once you start digging, you don't just find answers. You find the things you wish you hadn't, and I was only just getting started. It's funny how the smallest, most ordinary things can set off alarm bells when something feels wrong. For me, it was the bed. The very first day I came home, I noticed it right away. The bed was freshly made. The sheets were washed, neatly tucked, and smelling like detergent. At the time, I smiled. I thought, wow, that's sweet of her. She must have wanted me to come home to a clean bed. It felt thoughtful, even romantic in a way. But the more I thought about it later, the more it didn't sit right. Because here's the thing. For the past 6 months, maybe even a year, I've been the one washing the sheets. That's just how our household routine works. It's not something we ever argued about. It just became my job. And she never ever touched the laundry, unless it was her clothes. So why now? Why, out of the blue, would she decide to wash the sheets while I was gone? The more I replayed it in my head, the stranger it seemed. At first, I had brushed it off as a kind gesture. But now, after finding the glass, the nicotine pouches, the random alcohol bottles, and the KT tape, this kind gesture looked less like thoughtfulness and more like evidence being erased. I couldn't shake the thought. What if she wasn't cleaning to surprise me? What if she was cleaning to cover something up? I started picturing strangers lying in my bed, in the space I share with her. That's supposed to be our private, intimate place. The idea of other people I didn't even know, using it made my skin crawl. And suddenly, those freshly washed sheets felt less like a gift and more like a warning. But it didn't stop there. A few days after I got home, another detail popped up. This time, on our Amazon Prime account. One night, I went to put on one of my favorite shows. And as I scrolled through the continue watching section, I froze. There were shows listed there that I had never seen before. Completely random titles. Things I would never watch. At first, I thought maybe my girlfriend had been watching them while I was gone. So I asked her about it. Her answer, I don't know, I didn't watch those. That reply hit me harder than I expected. Because if she didn't watch them, and I didn't watch them, then who did? Amazon Prime doesn't lie. It keeps track. Someone had to have sat in my living room, using my TV, logged into my account, watching shows. It wasn't just unsettling, it was invasive. My home wasn't just lived in while I was gone. It was used. My things, my accounts, my space. It had been shared with strangers. And the way she denied it, as if she had no idea, only made things worse. Because either she was lying, or she genuinely didn't want to admit that she let people she barely knew sit on our couch and flip through our streaming accounts like they own the place, the bed and the watch history. On their own, they might not seem like much. But when you stack them on top of everything else, it starts to paint a very clear picture. First, the glass. Then, the nicotine pouches. Then, the alcohol containers. Then, the KT tape. And now, the sheets and the Prime account. It wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't just one suspicious detail. It was a pattern. And with every piece of that pattern, my trust cracked a little more. I sat there in my own house, staring at the continue watching list on the screen, my chest tight. I didn't feel at home anymore. I felt like a guest, in a space I thought was mine, a space that had been invaded without my permission. And the worst part, my girlfriend was still acting like nothing was wrong. She wasn't offering explanations. She wasn't clearing things up. She was brushing it all off, leaving me to connect the dots on my own. But the more dots I connected, the more I realized. I didn't like the picture I was seeing, and I hadn't even confronted her yet. There comes a point where curiosity turns into frustration, and frustration turns into confrontation. For me, that point had finally arrived. I had been patient. I had noticed the glass, the nicotine pouches, the random alcohol, the KT tape, the washed sheets, and the strange shows on Amazon Prime. Each clue was like a stone pressing down on my chest. And the more I kept quiet, the heavier it became. So, one evening, I decided enough was enough. I needed answers. I remember sitting down with her, my heart pounding, trying to keep my voice calm. I didn't want to explode. I didn't want to accuse her outright. I just wanted the truth. So I asked, "Can we talk about something?" She looked up, a little guarded. "Sure, what's up?" I started slow. I brought up the glass, then the nicotine pouches, then the alcohol bottles. One by one, I laid out the discoveries, like evidence in a courtroom. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully. At first, she kept shaking her head, brushing it off. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "You're overthinking. It's nothing." But the more I pressed, the shakier her voice became. She started fidgeting with her hands, her eyes darting away from mine. That's when I knew I was close to breaking through the wall. Finally, after what felt like hours of going back and forth, she sighed heavily and said the words I had been dreading. "Okay, fine." I went out. I went to a bar. There it was, the crack in the story. She admitted she hadn't just been resting at home like she claimed. She hadn't just been hanging out with her friend. She had gone out alone to a bar. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. "I met some people," she said quickly, almost like ripping off a Band-Aid. "2 guys and 2 girls. They seemed nice. We had drinks, and I brought them back here." Her words hit me like a wave. My house. Our house. The place I thought of as private and safe. She had invited strangers inside. According to her, they just watched music videos and chilled. That was it. Nothing more. She insisted, over and over, that nothing bad happened. But her story didn't sit right. "Who were they?" I asked. "What are their names? Do you even know them?" That's when the defensiveness kicked in. She shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms, her tone getting sharper. "Does it matter? They were just people. Just random people from the bar." "Of course it matters," I said firmly. "You brought strangers into our house, into my space. Don't you think I deserve to know who they were?" Instead of answering, she grew more flustered. Her face flushed red. Her breathing quickened. She wasn't calm. She wasn't explaining. She was panicking. And then, just like that, she snapped. "You're accusing me of cheating, aren't you?" she shouted. Her voice cracked. Her eyes wet with tears. I blinked, taken aback. "I didn't say that. I'm asking questions. I'm trying to understand what happened." But she wasn't listening anymore. She was in full defensive mode, lashing out as if by flipping the script she could escape the spotlight. Her hands trembled as she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you don't trust me after all these years." And before I could get another word in, she stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she had been, my thoughts racing. I had gone into the conversation hoping for clarity. Instead, I was left with even more questions. If it really was just a harmless hangout, why get so defensive? Why dodge the details? Why storm out like I had accused her of the worst thing imaginable when all I wanted was the truth? The confrontation didn't bring me peace. It didn't give me closure. It only deepened the pit in my stomach. Because now it wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what she refused to say. And that silence spoke louder than any words ever could. After the confrontation, I sat alone for hours, replaying everything in my head. The denial, the dodging, the half-confession about strangers in my house. I thought that was the end of it, that she had said her piece and stormed off, leaving me with more questions than answers. But later that night, she came back. Her tone was softer this time, almost apologetic, like she had decided to give me more of the truth, or at least a version of it. She sat down across from me, avoiding eye contact. And then she dropped another bomb. "Listen," she started. "There's something else I didn't tell you earlier." My stomach twisted. I braced myself. "One of the girls, she drank too much," she continued. "She wasn't feeling well, so I let her stay here. I let her sleep in our bed." I froze. Did I hear that right? "Our bed?" I asked slowly, my voice low and controlled, though inside I was anything but calm. "Yes," she said quickly, as if speed would make it sound better. "I gave her your spot. She just passed out, and I thought it would be kinder than sending her home." I stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. She had let a stranger, a random girl from the bar, someone I had never met, never even heard of, sleep in my bed, the place I considered the most private, personal part of my home. The explanation didn't sit right with me, not even a little. Why couldn't she just call an Uber? I asked. Or a taxi, or literally any other option besides sleeping in my bed. My girlfriend shook her head, fumbling for excuses. Her car was parked in a bad spot. It would have been complicated to get her home. I just drove her back to her car the next morning. But that answer didn't add up either. Even drunk people find ways home all the time. There are rideshare, apps, taxis, friends who can be called for help. And if this girl was truly in such bad shape, why wasn't she on the couch? Why wasn't she in the guest room? Why, out of all the places in the house, did she end up in my bed? It wasn't just odd. It was intimate. It was invasive. It crossed a line. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Because offering a stranger a ride in the morning is one thing. Offering them the most personal space I share with my partner is another. I asked her again, pressing harder this time. "Do you even know her name? Who was she?" But instead of giving me details, she got emotional. Her eyes welled up with tears, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I can't believe you think something happened. You're basically accusing me of cheating." And just like that, the focus shifted again. I wasn't the betrayed boyfriend anymore. I was suddenly the bad guy for asking questions, for daring to be suspicious, for trying to understand why my girlfriend of 7 years thought it was okay to bring strangers into our home and let one of them sleep in our bed. I tried to stay calm. I told her I wasn't accusing. I was just asking. But her tears, her trembling voice, her claim that I was being unfair, it all made me feel trapped. Like if I pushed any harder, I'd be painted as the unreasonable one. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Because here's the thing. Trust is built on boundaries. And in my eyes, letting a stranger into our bed wasn't just bending a boundary. It was shattering it. Even if her story was true, even if nothing bad happened, the decision itself was reckless, disrespectful, and deeply unsettling. That night, she didn't sleep beside me. She went to the couch, leaving me alone in a freshly washed bed that now felt foreign, tainted, and not mine at all. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was her story true, or was it just another layer of cover-up, another attempt to pacify me with half-truths? Either way, I realized something important. The bed didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like proof that the one place I thought was safe, private, and ours had been given away to someone else. And no excuse, no tears, and no defensive outburst could erase that. The conversation should have brought clarity. After everything I had discovered, the beer glass, the nicotine pouches, the strange alcohol, the washed sheets, and even the revelation that a stranger had slept in my bed. I thought I was finally on the verge of answers, but instead of the truth, I got something else entirely. Tears. It happened as I calmly pressed her with a few more questions. Nothing aggressive, nothing cruel, just simple logical questions. Who were these people? Why didn't she tell me in advance? Why was a stranger in my bed instead of the couch? But before I could even finish my thoughts, her eyes filled with tears. Her lip trembled, and she broke down crying. "I can't believe you think I would cheat on you," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "Do you really think so? Little of me?" I was stunned. Cheating. That was her word, not mine. Sure, I was suspicious. That much was obvious. But I hadn't accused her outright. I had gone out of my way to clarify that I was asking questions to rule out that possibility. But suddenly, the narrative had shifted. It wasn't about her actions anymore. It was about my supposed lack of trust. And just like that, I went from being the person who had been wronged to the person on trial. I tried to explain. I told her calmly, "I'm not accusing you. I'm trying to understand what happened because honestly, the story doesn't make sense. I just want clarity." But she shook her head, tears falling faster. "No, you're basically accusing me. You think I'd bring people here and betray you like that." And the guilt started creeping in. I hated seeing her cry. I hated the sound of her shaky breathing, the way her hands trembled as she wiped her face. She looked fragile, broken, like my words had cut her deeper than I intended. And part of me, the part that loved her, the part that had spent 7 years building a life with her, wanted to reach out, hug her, comfort her. But another part of me, the logical, unsettled part, knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just raw emotion. This was a shield, a deflection, a way to turn the spotlight away from her actions and onto my reaction. Instead of me asking why strangers were in my home, I was now defending myself against accusations of mistrust. It was manipulation, whether she realized it or not, and it worked. Because instead of standing firm and demanding answers, I found myself softening my tone. I told her it wasn't that big of a deal. I told her I believed her version of events, even though doubt was eating me alive inside. I told her she didn't need to cry, but the damage was done. The tears had changed the dynamic. No longer was she the one explaining herself. I was. I was the one justifying why I even dared to ask. I was the one trying to make sure I didn't come across as cruel, paranoid, or untrusting. And as soon as she had shifted the narrative enough, she pulled away entirely. She sniffled, wiped her face one last time, and muttered something about needing space. Then, without another word, she grabbed a blanket and headed for the couch. That's where she slept that night. Meanwhile, I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling, feeling an overwhelming cocktail of emotions. Frustration, confusion, sadness, even guilt. Guilt for asking questions I had every right to ask. Guilt for not comforting her, even though she was the one who had broken my trust. Guilt for somehow being made to feel like the villain in a story that wasn't mine to begin with. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about strangers in my house anymore. This was about trust, communication, and manipulation. If every attempt I made to seek clarity ended with tears and guilt tripping, then how was I supposed to ever feel secure in this relationship? I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to be the paranoid boyfriend. But I also didn't want to be the fool who ignored red flags just because someone cried when I pointed them out. As I lay there alone that night, one thing became painfully clear. I wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. I was fighting for my sanity. Here's the hard truth I've had to face. If my girlfriend's story is 100% true, if everything she said really happened exactly the way she described, then maybe it's not the absolute worst thing in the world. People make bad decisions when they're lonely. People can exercise poor judgment without necessarily having malicious intentions. Maybe, on the surface, it was just a reckless choice. Going to the bar alone, meeting some strangers, bringing them back to the house, and letting one of them sleep over. But the problem is, even if nothing else happened, even if it was all as innocent as she claims, it still crossed a line. It wasn't just poor judgment. It was disrespectful. This is our home, not just hers, not just mine. Our shared space, the place that's supposed to be safe, private, and protected from outsiders. Bringing strangers into that space, especially without telling me, violated something deeper than just a rule. It violated trust, because trust isn't just about, not cheating. It's about honesty. It's about respect. It's about knowing that your partner values the sanctity of your shared life enough to not invite outsiders into it recklessly. And in this situation, that's exactly what she did. And now I can't stop asking myself questions I'll probably never get answers to. Was it really just two guys and two girls hanging out? Were they really just watching music videos? Was there really nothing else going on? Or was that just the version of the story she thought I'd accept? Every time I think about it, I come back to the same details that don't add up. The freshly washed sheets, the Amazon Prime history, with shows neither of us watched, the mysterious nicotine pouches and alcohol containers, the KT tape that came out of nowhere, the fact that someone, some stranger, slept in my bed. Each detail might be explainable on its own, but stacked together, they form a picture that doesn't feel right. And the worst part, I may never know the full truth, because every time I tried to press for details, I was met with tears, defensiveness, or half answers. The story shifted, evolved, got patched up with convenient explanations. First, it was just hanging out. Then suddenly someone stayed the night. What else might be waiting to come out later? If it ever does, that uncertainty eats at me. Because trust is fragile. It takes years, 7 years, in our case, to build. But it only takes one moment, one bad decision, one reckless night to shatter it. And once it's cracked, no matter how much glue you use, it never looks the same again. Right now, my heart is unsettled. I keep running the scenarios in my head, replaying the conversations, searching for clues in her words, her tone, her body, language. I want to believe her. I really do. Because the alternative, that she's lying, that something deeper happened, is so much worse. But believing her feels like ignoring my gut. And my gut tells me something's off. So where does that leave me? It leaves me staring at the ceiling at night, lying in a bed that doesn't feel like mine anymore. It leaves me questioning whether the woman I've trusted for 7 years values that trust the same way I do. It leaves me wondering if this was just one reckless night or the beginning of a much bigger problem. One thing's for sure, I'll never look at my home the same way again. What once felt like my safe haven now feels invaded, tainted, like the walls themselves hold secrets I wasn't supposed to know. And I'll never look at my girlfriend the same way again either, because whether or not she cheated, whether or not the story she told me was true, she still crossed a boundary I can't ignore. She chose to bring strangers into our life without respect for me, for us, or for the trust we built together. And in the end, that hurts almost as much as betrayal itself.